Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Dr. Paul with a mail call. If you're new to the channel, here at Liberty Hill Comics, we do a giveaway every month. Check out the link at the bottom of the description for that video. I have a Golden Age comic here. This was an eBay purchase. Let's see the best way to extricate it from all of the packing material that the seller used. Looks like they did a pretty good job. Looks like it got to me safely, as far as we can tell. Let's see, we got a couple layers here. There we go. I think I got something still holding it in place somewhere. Let's figure out what. There we go. Just a little bit of tape on the sides. Check it out. What is it and why do we care? It says it was graded by somebody. Oh, it was a My Comic Shop purchase. It's graded by them as Fair Good 1.5. They tend to be pretty conservative, so that's actually good to see. The seller did not list a grade with the listing, an estimated grade. They just provided some pictures, and personally I estimated at about a 2, but my comic tends to be a bit conservative, so 1.5 for them. I think typically most people would call a 2, including even CGC. So that's interesting. In line with my expectations. All right, well, what is it and why do we care? It's America's Best Comics, number 12. This happens to be from February 1945, I believe. There's not a lot of information out there. So this says it was quarterly and it's copyright 1944. But I found on the internet, one place indicated it was February and another January. The indicia here indicates January 1945. So we'll go with that. Just as the war's winding down, it has this great wartime Alex Schomburg cover, and it features Nedor Publications' big heroes. So this is Pyromania, Black Terror, American Eagle, and Doc Strange, the original Doc Strange. And they're obviously signing up with their blood donor cards and offering to donate blood to support the war effort at the Red Cross with this nurse. Great wartime cover by Schomburg, as I mentioned. He was doing covers for Marvel Comics and also for the Nedor Publications. Nedor published comics from 1939 through 1956, so they span the entirety of the Golden Age, from the pre-war, the war period, which is obviously what this is, and then the post-war or Atomic Age period as well. They published a series of anthologies. This is one of them. Similar to DC, Marvel, and Fawcett at the time, they would have these anthology books where each of these characters and a few others would get one story in the book. And like for DC, Action, the lead story would be Superman, but Superman also had his own title. In Nedor Publications, the most popular hero was the Black Terror. He had his own title, which was quarterly. And then he was the lead feature in America's Best. He was also the lead feature in Exciting Comics. One of the great things about this cover is that we have all these heroes in one place. And on the cover, that was not uncommon for the Nedor Publications. But these anthology books, they all have individual stories, so they're not ever appearing in story altogether, at least to my knowledge. This particular issue is very rare. There are only 13 universal copies in the CG Census, and I tried to do some research on the internet with this issue. There was really not very much out there. The issue contents are not cataloged in the Grand Comics database, the GCD, and Gerber lists this issue as a scarcity index of 5. So let's do a little walkthrough. So we start with a Pyroman story. Pyroman's really iconic looking. I love the look of Pyroman. I don't know, I can't really speak to the stories, but this purple and red and the lightning bolts and the sort of electric charge around him really kind of speaks of the time for me. This art, I think, is pretty passable for the age, and in my experience, Nedor Publications did have solid art throughout. The story flows, you can tell there's sort of dynamic images, and the story is moved along by the art quite nicely. Some of the poses are a little bit stiff, but overall I think it actually is pretty dynamic. You have these poses where it's obvious he's moving at great speed. And where we have these punches where, you know, the follow through is so dramatic. It reminds me always of How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, where Stan discussed how, you know, they always had these exaggerated poses to really communicate the action. Here's the Black Terror story with Tim Terror, his sidekick, and these guys are wearing Nazi armbands. So even though the war is winding down, obviously this book would have been written earlier and published, printed at, you know, months before the developments of early 45. So they're still in very much, Nedor Publications was very patriotic. They always had, I shouldn't say always, but they had a lot of issues with the war bonds. They had a lot of these kinds of patriotic messages. I think more so by volume than DC or Marvel, both of whom had these kinds of messages, but it seemed to be more pervasive in the Nedor Publications, from what I've been able to tell. The Black Terror story here, to me, doesn't have quite as nice an art as Pyroman, but still very serviceable, very dynamic. This is why it's called the Golden Age. You always had some text stories in these Golden Age books. Here's the Doc Strange story. Again, he's battling Nazis. Looks like these Nazis were about to try to brand this young lady. Not sure why they were branding folks, but wonder if there were any objections to Marvel's use of Doctor Strange 20 years later. 15, 16 years later, something like that. This is Doc Strange. Love the art. You know, they're obviously drawing 30s era cars or early 40s era cars, pre-war cars, because car production in the United States stopped during the war. So these are all pre-war cars. Great boats. And then the last story, we have another text story, and then the last story is the American Eagle story. This is the Maurice Goodworth art. And I've seen several of these anthologies that had the Goodworth art. For me, it's not as refined as the other, although maybe it's a matter of the inking, but you know, this does not look to me to be the same quality as the the art in the earlier stories. Again, maybe it's the inking, although I think in this period, perhaps Gutwirth drew it and inked it himself. Not sure. Looks like the book is complete. There's a dog ear that I can take care of. There's some staining. Looks complete. There's obviously some damage here. And we have a really pronounced spine roll with some staining here. A lot of soiling. Bit of a dust shadow. But overall, a complete book. I would rate it in that range, around a 1.8 to a 2 as it sits. But when I was looking at it, it looked like a book that had a lot of potential for conservation, which is why I was interested in it. It looks to me like it could be pretty easily a 2.5, a 3 with just a little bit of work, and with a full conservation, maybe even this book gets to a 4, a conserved 4. Have to see how some of these folds came together, and when you mend this paper, just how well, just how much is missing. But I mentioned the rarity of this, and with a book so rare, fewer than 15 in the CGC Census, it's impossible to determine fair market value, especially with the volatility created by the bear market in all asset classes. The last sales for a CGC 8.0 were in September of 2022. That was for a little over $2,000. And there was a 4.5 that sold back in March of 2022 for a little over $300. All that said, we've talked before about certain Golden Age books that are this rare. There are only 1 or 2 dozen copies in the CGC Census. When you see these books, you sort of pay what you need to pay to get them into your collection, because you have no idea when you'll ever see a complete copy again. And if you do get a chance to upgrade in the future to a nicer copy, there's always a market for these books, and you could sell this lower grade copy to offset the cost of acquiring a nicer one if you want to. I'll be putting this copy into my PC, and when I get the time, it's a great candidate for a full conservation to preserve for future generations. Obviously, this copy has a few miles on it, but we should be able to return it to some of its former glory. And I'll also likely enter the contents of this comic into the Grand Comics database, since they're missing, just to contribute to the community's knowledge before these treasures are gone. My winning bid on this book was $130, so with tax and shipping, I'm into it for $150, which it looks like that's what the previous owner had purchased it for from mycomics.com. I think at that price, it's well bought, and I'm really happy to have the book in my collection, especially because of how rare it is. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little unboxing and market review video. If you have enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. Leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation. Let's add to the community. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. And until next time, happy hunting and take care of one another.